Okay. Well, I hope you like the short intro, but I just wanted to say that we all know most presentations start well, but they often can get worse. Even the first slide is only 10 seconds long. Unless it grabs your attention, they're going to dread the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes of the meeting. First impressions are what counts. They'll make up their mind quite quickly and make a decision before you've even had a chance to get onto your next part of your speech or even your next slide. Communication is a big topic today. So what I'm going to do is going to look at some general points which I think we can all relate to. First of all, introduction to who I am, for those who don't know me. Who were good communicators and why, and who are good communicators. Barriers to communication, how to overcome them. A few things not to do and to do. And what's in it for those who communicate. And we'll do questions at the end, if that's okay with you guys. All right, let's crack on. That's me. Half Welsh, half Maltese, actually from an island of Gozo my family comes from, just north of Malta. Born and bred in the UK. I'm the CEO of Malta and basically entails oversee operations, performance of the companies, and obviously looking after the staff. Right, first of all, I'd like you to think about how much time per day you spend communicating with other people. For example, writing emails, talking to colleagues, selling to clients, presenting at meetings, answering telephone calls, you get the idea. Not just about work, but it's also at home as well. Any guesses from anybody? Okay.
You can type in the chat box as well, everyone.
I don't have access to the chat box at the moment, remember, so Emma will have to pass that on to me, okay? All right, 20 hours. I've got a few coming through here, 20 hours, 15 hours, 18 hours. Well, the average worker actually spends 2.5 hours writing emails a day in work. There's a study carried out by the McKinsey Global Institute, and it shows that every worker spends some 81 working days hunched over the computer, emailing other people, sometimes in the office. Based on a typical working week, that works out approximately 28% of their time sending emails. Now, think about this. That's just emails. Add telephone calls, meetings you attend, conversations, and you get the idea. Now, what I want you to think about is why is it so important? I know it might sound obvious, but it's such an important question. Does anybody have any idea, I'd like to share why communication is so important? Okay, as I said, it might sound an obvious question, because obviously to communicate your ideas, your thoughts to other people. And of course, it is about that, but it's a lot more. It's important to communicate well in order to strengthen your relationships. Communicate helps you build trust. And communicating with people can lead to some exciting opportunities. As the saying goes, if you don't ask, you don't get. And remember, it's not just about being at work. It's when you're at home as well. It's in your daily life. So, who are or were great communicators? Now, I wanted to illustrate some of the things I'm going to say. I thought if we looked at, I picked out 5 of some of the greatest communicators living and dead, and I want to explain why. So, the 5 I picked out, and I'll explain why in a minute: Martin Luther King, Pope Francis, Winston Churchill, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Let me start with Martin Luther King. Most people know of the I Have a Dream speech. This was given on the Lincoln Memorial, steps of, I should say, on August the 28th, 1963. This is one of the most famous speeches in the world, and it's repeated and analysed continually. In this speech, and in many of his other speeches, King used the repetition of a phrase at the beginning of a sentence to reinforce the message. This practice goes by the name of anaphora. For this, amongst many other reasons, this speech is viewed as a great speech. Some might even class it as a masterclass. Here are some more interesting stats for you regarding this speech. He said, "I have a dream," 8 times. "Now is the time," 4 times. Now all this is reinforcing the message he's trying to get through. In the same speech, he repeated on numerous times, 100 years later, we can never be satisfied. With this faith, let freedom ring, free at last. All these phrases are poignant and give a punch to what he's saying, more so when he's repeating. Once again, reinforcing the message. Now, some might be surprised by this one, Pope Francis. Pope Francis was actually made Time Magazine Person of the Year for 2013, and he was also nominated for European Communicator of the Year. Most say he's had some radically different views of the Church and about being Pope compared to his predecessors. The current Pope focuses on communicating at a human level. People say he speaks from the heart, and that is very sincere. He likes to crack jokes, and we all know humour goes a long way in winning people over. He tries to make his speeches much more realistic and vivid. One of his more well-known speeches is about associating a person to a shipwreck. You can check that out for yourselves. And he goes to use lots of metaphors, simply painting a picture with words, once again reinforcing his message. Metaphors such as life is a roller coaster, a blanket of snow covered the ground, the roads were like a parking lot this morning. All these messages create images, and with those images reinforces the message. Now, one of the most worldwide great communicators, Winston Churchill. His rhetoric style and written word has often been studied. He was a statesman in the highest degree and is respected worldwide for his ability to capture hearts, minds, not only of his audience, but those who would read his speeches later. He was famous for his public aura and dominated the definition of what it means to be remembered, with his 2-finger salute for victory and his cigar. Many may not know that Churchill spoke with a lisp, and some argue that at one time in his life he stuttered, going to show that anybody could be a great communicator. Also, to be a great communicator doesn't need to make it into a long speech. His shortest speech given, which is shown in front of you, was only 5 words long. He got up and said, "Never, never, never give up," and then promptly sat down. Enough said. I just want to mention 2 American presidents as well, Abraham Lincoln and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Lincoln was a powerful speaker with great opening lines. He will long be remembered for his inspiring words, what we now call the Gettysburg Address, at the end of the American, or the beginning, and I'm not sure actually, but it's in the American Civil War, to be honest. Not only did he change the course of human history, but he set standards for future leaders. As a reminder of that speech, I'll read you some of the more famous lines. 407 years, our father brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt was the 32nd President of the United States. He was known as a patriot, optimist, and had quick wit. He was the only American president ever to be elected more than 2 terms. He actually died in office and served 4 terms. After the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, it was Roosevelt who was quickly able to rally the American public and lift their spirits. Because of his communication skills and his natural leadership presence, he stabilized the emotional side of the American people. And some of these quotes and speeches you'll see are really well known, but you may not know actually who they came from. So these are some of Roosevelt's. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Be sincere, be brief, be seated. So, there's some examples. What I'd like to show you is why these 5 are considered to be great communicators. Now, there's 7 key elements which all authors and finiciados on this subject always point to. We have a look at the first one. Connect. Many people begin with their own agenda. And I think this is especially in some of our sales pitches and some of our meetings we go to. They have something to say or to prove. So they just start right in without considering who they're talking to, who the person is at the other end. Often they simply broadcast their message, assuming people will think it's the most important information in the world. Think about when someone phones you at home in the evening to try and sell you something that you don't actually want. Good communicators know that people won't start listening unless they connect intellectually and emotionally. It's very important. So the key here is to know your audience. Who are you speaking to? Start conveying an emotional antidote that shows your common perspective, like the Pope does. A classic example that I sometimes tell my guys, talk about the previous sports day. Talk about what's in the news. Get the connection. And this is what I'm always saying. Read the papers. Read the articles. So you have a general understanding of what's going on. People also say that when Bill Clinton, another American president, talked to you, he would make you feel like you're the only person in the world. Now, maybe you should ask Monica Lewinsky about that, but that's a different story. Anyway, the idea is to let your listeners feel your empathy and know you value their importance. The second reason is to engage them. Communicator must know how to give and take in a reciprocal manner, when to initiate conversation and when to encourage others to speak. So the most frustrating communication can be when you have to carry the whole conversation. You want people to talk back to you. Everybody needs to participate as well as to listen. To do this better, you need to be well informed of the persons you're speaking with, or at least ready to learn and listen. Drag them into the conversation. The key is to show understanding and interest. The next one, disarm. And this might seem a strange one, but people are naturally defensive these days. And a good communicator must be able to lower the defense of those they're communicating with. Agree. Overcome objections. All part disarming. But you have to be authentic and show genuine interest in the other person. A good idea is to use humor. Make other people feel comfortable. Focus. Rambling on and not caring about what you're saying is an excellent way to lose your audience. So my advice would be to get organized. Once again, if you're in a meeting, sales pitch, and you just start going on and just trying to throw as much information at the person, you'll lose them. Be consistent in your message too, as contradiction kills credibility. Plan your conversations. Think through what comes out of your mouth. What industry are you dealing with? What sector are you dealing with? What relevance do I have, or what I'm going to show them have with their sector, their industry, their business, with them? Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Next point, clarify. If you overwhelm the listener, they will zone out either from confusion or boredom. Reagan was best known for being simple and clear, but he was also known as a great orator, surprising as that might sound. Don't assume just because you understand what you're saying that the audience does too. This is classic, especially in our industry. If we're going to outside our basic industry, we automatically assume that stuff that we take for granted, they don't take for granted. It's very important that you clarify things. Find simple ways to get complex messages across. During a conversation, ask people if they understand what you said. And if not, say it again differently. Reinforce that message. Leads on nicely. As we said with Martin Luther King, was very good at this. Anaphora. Reinforce the message. Repeat the message time and time again. When you set a goal and you're having a meeting, repeat it so the message is fully understood and it's clear. Always said, sometimes you need to repeat the message in a different way. How many times you had a conversation later when you asked what you remembered? You can't remember a thing. A good communicator would understand that people only retain 10% of what they hear, and as such, they're good at reinforcing key points When they tell you something, repetition is the key. Practice. Winston Churchill had a lisp and supposedly stuttered. That shows that communication can be developed with practicing. Most professional speakers spend hours practicing, studying techniques from their body movement to their voice tone to the way they look. And in a way, everybody does. Chances are you have some weaknesses in your communication skills that you could improve. You need to identify these, and practice will help you. Now, I want to have a look at barriers of communication. Any ideas? Anyone got any thoughts? Okay, and as well as pointed out by Emma, that's a classic one where somebody types an email and it's taken in a total different tone to what they meant. Actually, there was a meeting going on this morning where we were dealing with a partner with an email, and there was so much misunderstanding. In the end, they said, let's speak, and within 5 minutes, it was sorted. We got Gwilym pointing out lack of eye contact, and that's true. But, you know, these all can make life very difficult. Here's some points that I put down. Let me explain. Physical barriers, time, place, noise, and space. Think about that. It might sound obvious, but it's sometimes true. You know, try and have a conversation when you've got a bus going past you or a lorry going past you. Probably not the best place to have a conversation. Emotional. They may not just not be. Are you there?
Yes, we can hear you again. Thank you.
It's a great example of communication. If you can't hear me, how can I communicate? Okay, let me carry on where I left off. I mentioned gender, jargon or slang. Don't use it. You'll lose a lot of people. Classic mistake, assumption. Assuming people know what you're talking about. That goes for jargon abbreviations as well. Keep your conversation simple. Now, this is something I know I'm guilty of, speaking too fast. Some cultures naturally speak fast. Try and breathe and slow down. Speaking unclearly, don't mumble. Orate with clarity. Visual distractions. How many times you've been in a meeting and somebody's on a mobile phone or doing something else? Do they honestly think you've got their full attention? No. And, you know, this is something I come across quite often. It can be very distracting, especially when you're trying to get an important point over. Now, let me suggest a few things not to do in order to improve communication. And sadly, these are all depressingly familiar, and we're all guilty of these at some time or another. Back-to-back meetings, when there's no breaks in between, when exactly people are meant to supposed to prepare, follow up, respond, or simply take a rest. Speak in a monotone voice. You'll bore them. And on that note, don't bore them. Ever been to a conference where you've fallen asleep? I know I have. Don't take too long to get to the point. Use the KISS phrase. Keep it simple, stupid. Works here. People like things to be short as possible and get to the point. Don't be too selfish. Tell people what they need to know, not what you want them to know, which is often everything. Remember the rules. People only remember 10% of what they hear, so make sure it is really what they need to know. Don't choose the wrong form of communication, as I mentioned. Email or text when you should call. One of the easiest mistakes to make. Don't speak to the wrong person. When you want to reach out to a specific person and you're asking someone else to act as a middleman, this will usually dilute your message. This does not mean only speak to these people. Sometimes, to reinforce your message, you need to speak to users of the system to get supporters in that area who can then communicate to the person that you'll need to speak to at a later time. Here's a few other things to do, or you should do, I should say. Active listening. Think of listening based on the ratio. You have 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use them in that ratio. Rapid repeat. Think of subconscious encoding. Simply repeat, silent in your mind. What is being said a fraction of a second later? Or repeat what you've told somebody in a different way. Things that are repeating again and again tend to stick in your mind. Tone of voice, a classic one. Use emphasis on important points. Appropriate tone of voice will go a long way. Shouting at somebody is never productive. Pace. Be aware of the pace at which people are speaking and at your own pace. Body language. Now this is huge. This is a big giveaway. If a person's leaning towards you, they tend to be more comfortable and tend to be listening to you. Leaning away from you, less comfortable. Arms crossed, rolling eyes, are they asleep? Watching our body language is of no use when delivering a webinar, but hopefully nobody is asleep yet. You've got to understand when you're talking and communicating, there's lots of communication going on at the same time. And don't forget to consider the gestures within the context of the overall communication, rather than looking at them in isolation. If they yawn when you speak to them, let's say on a teleconference call, is it because it's really late night where you're calling, or is it because they're bored? Active watching. Active watching is as crucial as active listening. And how you're going to check their body language if you don't actively watch. Smile and be enthusiastic. An enthusiastic smile and showing interest, great, fine, super. That will encourage others to be enthusiastic. One of the most important things, question skills. Questions are very powerful because they're answered. Even if the answer is not verbalized, spoken aloud in other words. They'll sometimes also create a number of different situations reacting by different types of questions you use. Questions that include implied information would be, do you want to renew for 50 reports a year? You took 40 reports last year. Here you're simply implying the standard order of the customer. Another question that states information would be, to create the marketing list for the client specifications will involve about an additional 6 hours work. Do you think the team would prefer to do this next week or the week after? Here you get them to focus on the potential outcome and the timelines. And of course, open and closed questions. An open question would usually solicit a large amount of information, which every salesperson should know. A closed question should solicit a small amount of information, even a one-word answer, which can make communication a bit difficult at times. A closed-ended question provides agreement, contradiction, or short burst information. An open-ended question seeks more broader information in the response. Think about which results you are seeking in your questions, and you can use questions to fill in the barriers of silence and show interest. Finally, stay focused. Stick to the point. Now, the next slide might be a bit of an unusual one. What's in it for me? What are you trying to achieve in your communication? The person you're trying to convince will always think, what's in it for me? At the end of the day, people do what they want. When they think it benefits them to do so. The problem is that you often can't see the benefits, or they can't see the benefits. So they do things less well or quickly than you'd like, or they don't do them at all. It's all about how you say it. The best solution is to persuade them by using phrases that appeal to their self-interest. In other words, know your person. Who are you dealing with? You can do this by showing them one or both ways, positive or negatively. The positive impact to them for doing what they want and or the negative impact if they don't. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want somebody to agree a diary date for a telephone meeting with you, but you don't want to appear pestering. The way I ask them by pointing out the positive would be, let's make sure we can progress our discussions as quickly as possible by putting our next chat in the diary. To advise them negatively, or the outcome if they don't, let's avoid the dreaded table tennis telephone calls and agree a time now so we can chat again about this. Something really simple but quite strong. Now, Durex Sex Survey. What can we learn from this? And what the hell does this have to do with communication? There was an article written by a guy called Andy Bounds, which you can Google. He said, according to the Durex Sex Survey, heterosexual men sleep with, on average, 13 women in their life, whereas heterosexual women sleep on average of 7 men. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that somebody's lying. Very important. And as well, it also tells you it's an interesting fact. As I've said before, keep things interesting. Just going to wrap up now, guys. Think of all you find interesting, real life, hobbies, fascinating facts, humour, travel, learning new things. And ask yourself how many of these you see in other people's communication. Sorry guys for the technical difficulties. I keep dropping out on the wireless network, so I apologise now. Generally guys, as I said, just remember, you're only going to remember 10% of any presentations or communications they're given to you. So just make sure that they remember the 10% that you want to give them. Okay guys, that's all from me for now. Is there any questions? Or, I'm always available offline if you want to.